Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So if you use Google services, one of the services that I've used for quite a while now is Google Domains. And Google's pretty well known for coming up with an absolutely fantastic service, getting a lot of people to use it, and then on down the road, they either discontinue that service or they sell it to someone else. And that's what's happened with Google Domains. So this video is about taking Google Domains, registered domains, and migrating them over to Cloudflare. And this is just one option, but it's kind of my recommended option. So Squarespace has purchased the Google Domains service from Google. So if you have a domain that's hosted on Google Domains, in the future, if you do nothing, it will be hosted on Squarespace. And most home lab users have a dynamically changing WAN address from their ISP, and so that requires something called dynamic DNS in order to be able to keep up with that address and change it accordingly. So Google announced that Squarespace is not going to offer DDNS services, so they're not going to have any dynamic DNS services. Now, there are some third-party places that you can go off to manage your DDNS service, but I kind of like a one-stop shop when it comes to managing my domain. So Cloudflare offers more robust domain services, and they offer them at a lesser price than does Google, and they also have a lot of very interesting additional features that I'll probably cover in videos in the future. So I have migrated both of my Google domains, and I also migrated one customer domain over to Cloudflare so far, and they've been uneventful, and I'm very pleased with the results. So there was a Google Domains email that came out a few weeks ago, and it basically says, hey, as previously communicated, Squarespace has purchased all domain name registrations and related customer accounts from Google Domains. And I've highlighted the part here where it says, we wanted to inform you that a feature that you use, namely DDNS, will not be supported by Squarespace. And the second part of the email has an action required section in it, and I've highlighted the place where it says, since Squarespace Domains doesn't offer DDNS services, you should consider looking for an alternative from another provider and configure that ahead of your domain migration. So yes, you can go places and use other functions outside of Squarespace that will give you DDNS services, but I really wanted to be able to offer all of my services from my domain name service provider because I feel like that's a core capability they should be offering. So what are the required steps if you decide that you want to migrate your domain from Google Domains over to Cloudflare? And first of all, you have to go off and create a Cloudflare account. And then I highly recommend that you turn on two-factor authentication because if you self-host services, the last thing you want to have happen is have your domain name hijacked by somebody else because they hack your password. So you go on to the Cloudflare site once you've registered for an account and you've logged into it. They give you an option for add a site. And this is really designed to add a website, but it's going to be used for kind of the same purpose as you'll see in the demonstration that follows my little intro here. And so you're going to add a site and you're going to add it with the same name as your domain. And then you're going to select the option called Transfer Domains, which is under their domain registration area. And then you're going to select the domain that you just added, or rather the site that you just added. And then you're going to go sign on to Google Domains at domains.google.com, and you're going to go into their registration settings section, which is in the left-hand menu of Google Domains. And then from there, you're going to unlock your domain with the domain lock setting, which is normally a setting that prevents your domain from being transferred by someone else. And then you're going to select transfer out, and you're going to click get authorization code or get auth code. And then you're going to copy that auth code, and you're going to provide it on the Cloudflare site during the domain transfer operation when it is asked for. And then you're going to update and confirm your contact information in Cloudflare. The next thing that's going to happen is you're going to receive an email from Google. And that email will have a link to confirm that, yea, verily, despite the fact that I provided my transfer code, I really want to confirm that I really do honestly want to do this transfer. And that email looks like this. It gives you one hyperlink that simply says cancel or approve transfer. When you click on it, it takes you over to your Google Domains account, and it gives you an option to confirm the transfer or say, no, I really didn't want to do this. So what about dynamic DNS? So I led with the fact that dynamic DNS is something that's going to be required if you're self-hosting services. And how does Cloudflare do that? Well, Cloudflare doesn't support a traditional DDNS A record. Cloudflare has an API, or an application programming interface, that allows you to make changes to your domain A record. So assuming, like in my case, I had Scotti-BYTE.com, it would be an A record for my domain. I would access the Cloudflare API, and that would allow me to update that domain A record should the WAN address that my ISP grants me change. So there's a simple Docker application that I'm going to review in the demonstration following this intro that can use that Cloudflare API to keep the A record for your domain pointed to your ISP WAN address anytime that it happens to change. So let's go see how to perform these steps. The first step to moving over to Cloudflare from Google Domains is we actually have to create a Cloudflare account. In order to do that, go ahead and go over to cloudflare.com, and that's where I am right here. And I'm going to pop my video down since we need the options in the upper right hand corner. Notice there's a sign up option. Go ahead and click on sign up. When it comes up, you're going to want to go ahead and choose the free plan. Just go ahead and click on add a website. Once you get add a website, it'll say we want to go ahead and get you started with Cloudflare. Go ahead and give us a username and password. I've already got one here with my Bitwarden, so I'm typing in a username and a password, or an email and a password. It's going ahead and saying Cloudflare dashboard is loading. And then I'm just going to say, instead of add a website or application, I'm going to go ahead and say explore all products. Now you can click this option that says get started. And once you do that, it will say enter your domain. And so I have a test domain from a friend. I'm going to go ahead and enter its name. And then I'm going to say continue. And now we have that in there. It says, what type of domain do you want to set up? I'm going to say we want the free option. So I highlight the free option. I click continue. And then it comes up and says scanning for existing domain records. And of course, I don't have any domain records for this domain right now. And actually, I don't own a domain right now. This is just Cloudflare's kind of internal method of setting up a domain to begin with. Initially, I don't have any DNS records for my domain because I'm going to import those from Google Domains. So instead, I'm going to go ahead and click continue here, and I'll say, yeah, confirm that I'll add my DNS records later. And so I hit confirm. And it said it's not active on Cloudflare yet. It basically says go ahead and take these assign Cloudflare name servers and go over to your registrar and add those to your registrar over there. So the reason those options exist for you to take and copy these two name servers and add them to custom name servers over on Google Domains is so they can point some of that information back over here, because it's possible that you might want to use Cloudflare services, but you still want to stick with your Google Domains. But I found I still needed to make these options and add these two name servers as custom name servers over on Google Domains prior to my migration. So at this point, let's make a little bit of a detour by coming in the upper right hand corner, and where you see this little man here, click on that down arrow and go to my profile. And then over here on the left margin, go over to authentication, and you see where it says that two-factor authentication is disabled. Go ahead and click on setup, and you have an option to either enable security key authentication, which is a hardware security key, or a mobile authentication, which is a two-factor authentication with a time-based one-time password, which you can use through either the Google time-based one-time passwords. I use the Bitwarden one-time password sometimes, but I have a Ubiquitous security key, which is a hardware key, and that's really my top recommendation. So if I click on add, and it said go ahead and enter your security key, it's looking for my password for my account. So I'm going to go ahead and copy my password, and I'm going to paste my password in for my Cloudflare account. I'm going to click next, and then over here it's going to say choose what you want to log into. So I'll go ahead and say it's this secondary pass key, and so I'll go ahead and save that. So at this point it says name your security key, and I'll just call this thing, I don't know, main, or just Scott, and that'll give my security key a name over here. Again, it wants a password, and so that password is going to be the password for this guy, and I go ahead and paste that in, and I do a next, and then I click next again, and then at this point I should be able to log out of my account. So now that I have my two-factor hardware key authentication turned on, I go up to my Bitwarden, I say go ahead and enter my username and password. I click login. It goes ahead and asks me for my PIN code for my hardware key. My hardware key is inserted in my machine. It says touch my key to continue. I go ahead and touch the key, and it goes ahead and logs in. So now we have two-factor hardware authentication set up for my Cloudflare account, and that's what I recommend for everybody to have the highest level of security associated with your domain account on Cloudflare. So now that we have our security turned up to the highest level, we're going to go ahead and proceed with the domain transfer. You can see here it says pending name server update, and if we click on this and go down, you'll see that there are two name servers that it wants you to add back to Google Domains, or whoever your domain name service provider is. So I'm going to click to copy the first one. I'm going to go over to Google Domains. I'm going to click on Manage My Domain, and then I'm going to go down to DNS. I'm going to click on Custom Name Servers. Here at Custom Name Servers, I'm going to go ahead and paste in this name server here, and then I'm going to go back to Cloudflare. I'm going to copy the second name server, and then I'm going to come back here to Google Domains, and I'm going to paste the second name server in here for Cloudflare. I'm going to click on Save. So what this does is this updates the name servers from the perspective of Cloudflare. So even though Cloudflare is not our DNS provider at this moment, what it does do is it allows Cloudflare to perform operations for some of its other features and functions. And we need to make this step in order to be able to perform our domain transfer. So we aren't quite done yet with Google Domains because we're going to have to click switch to these settings on the custom name servers on the domain on the Google Domains side. And once I click switch to these settings, it says custom DNS config is activated. And now when I go back over here to the Cloudflare, I can back up to the top level and it says pending name server update. And here in just a couple of minutes, it will have completed that. So I want to point out, before the name server update is actually completed, if we go over here to domain registration and say transfer domains, you're not going to get a list of domains you can transfer. So our one domain that we want to transfer is not yet in this list. So we have to go back up here to websites and we have to wait until this name server update completes, and then our domain will be in a list of domains that we can transfer over here to Cloudflare. One other way to determine that this transfer is not yet complete is you can go ahead and click on your domain name, and in the overview you can see it says that it is not available on Cloudflare yet, and it says update the name servers at your registrar, and in this case they're referring to Google Domains because Google Domains is where this particular domain is registered. So we're waiting for those name servers to take effect before we can begin the transfer of the registration of that domain over to Cloudflare. And here, after changing the custom DNS name records over on Google Domains, we're back on Cloudflare, and you can see here that it says that our domain is active. And if we click on our domain, it says Cloudflare is now protecting your site. The next step we want to take is to back up to the top level, and when we do that, we have the domain registration option. When we click it, we can go to transfer domains. When we click on transfer domains, you'll see that it lists the domain, but then it says that the registry status is that the client transfer is prohibited. Please unlock and allow a few hours to update. So we're going to need to go over to Google Domains, and it says here under the registration settings that the domain is locked. So we're going to go ahead and unlock the domain, and it says, your domain may be susceptible to unauthorized transfer while being unlocked. But that's okay because we are watching the process here real time. And now we go back over here and we should be able to go up to websites, go down to domain registration, say transfer domains, and in a few minutes, and your mileage may vary, it will eventually say that your domain is a candidate for transfer. So about 15 minutes has passed, and I go down to domain registration, choose transfer domains, and now it says in order to transfer domains you must add a payment method. And so I'm going to go ahead and click add a payment method, and in this particular case I'm going to go ahead and add my credit card information, and I'll be right back. Now that I've entered my payment information, it says select domains to transfer, and it provides the name of the domain. It says what the renewal cost will be, and I can say confirm domains. At that point, it says request authorization code. So at this point, you want to go back over to Google Domains and go to the transfer out section under the registration settings and say get authorization code. And you don't want to share this authorization code you're going to get with anybody. So I provide my credentials for my Google account, and then after I do that, it should go in here and provide me a transfer code. So I can copy this transfer code, and I can go back over to the Cloudflare, and I can go ahead and paste that transfer code in here and say confirm and proceed. At this point, it asks you to enter all of your contact information, and that is for the purpose of not your credit card, but for the purpose of registering your domain and having the proper contact information. Once I put all of that information in and I say confirm and finalize transfer, it will go ahead and perform a transfer. So if you completed the contact information and then you click the confirm and finalize transfer option, you would be getting an email back from Google Domains eventually, which would say cancel or approve transfer. And if you would click on this option, it would go over to Google Domains and give one more confirmation that you in fact wanted to transfer the domain. And if you said transfer or approve transfer, it would continue and complete the transfer process, and your domain would be over on Cloudflare. Now, this process that I've talked about in this video should work for both transferring from Google Domains as well as Squarespace. The options on the menu for Squarespace are probably going to be in a different place, and since I don't have a Squarespace domain, I can't show you that at this point in time. But these are the steps that are necessary to transfer a domain over to Cloudflare in general. So here we are back on Google Domains, and after your transfer of your domain has taken place from Google Domains over to Cloudflare, you'll notice that your Google Domains account here does not list your domain any longer because your domain is being managed by Cloudflare. In addition to that, it also says that if you get a new domain now at Google, you'll actually be getting a Squarespace domain because Google is not accepting any new domains, and that's why they are selling their domain management service over to Squarespace. Anyway, this is how it looks, and this is also an indication that your transfer has been completed. You'll also receive emails from Google indicating that your domain has been transferred out, and you'll receive an email from Cloudflare indicating you have your domain now correctly moved over to Cloudflare. Here we are on the Scotti-BYTE.com dashboard for Cloudflare, and you'll notice that I have an A record for Scotti-BYTE.com, which translates to the WAN address that my ISP grants me. But we know that that WAN address can change, and in fact it does change typically when my cable modem reboots or my ISP performs maintenance updates. And when that happens, it's important to be able to have my A record for Scotti-BYTE.com follow that current address because my self-hosted services rely upon that. Also, I want to point out here that they have this proxy capability, and when your domain records move over as a result of transitioning your domain, it will by default proxy these records. And there are many of your services, self-hosted services, that may not work with proxied records. So for right now, I don't have the proxy on for any of them. The proxy provides additional protections for your websites, but since I have quite a few protections already on my network, I am still experimenting with what Cloudflare provides here, but having the proxy status turned off initially will be the best case scenario on getting things to work the first time. So in Google Domains, one of the things you'll notice is that they provide you a DNS A record, or DDNS A record, and that DDNS A record can use a DDNS client to update your domain name when the address of your ISP changes. However, Cloudflare does not offer that. Instead, Cloudflare has an API mechanism that can allow you to make changes to settings in general on the Cloudflare domain that you have registered. So for purposes of illustration, I did not want to expose my API keys, so I've logged into my secondary account that I was using for demonstration earlier in the video. And when you log in, assuming that you have a website, and here I don't have one at this point in time, you're going to go up here to the upper right hand corner, click on that, and go to My Profile. Under My Profile, if you'll recall, this is where we set the two-factor authentication on for security purposes, but one of the other options in the left-hand menu is an option for API tokens. And by default, they give you a global API key, but you're going to want to go up here and click Create Token. So when you create token, you get several different choices for different types of API tokens. Scroll down to the bottom and click Create Custom Token, and then click Get Started. To create our custom API token, the first thing that we want to do is we want to provide it a name. So you might give it the name of something like Scotti-BYTE.com in my case, and I'm just going to say Scotti-BYTE.com-API. And that just is a reminder for what this is for. And then I'm going to come down here to permissions, and I'm going to say zone permissions, and then I'm going to say zone settings at the bottom here. So we have zone, and then we have zone settings, and I want to set up the access read. And then I want to go down here and add another one, and I want to go ahead again and say zone, and this time instead of zone settings, I'm going to say zone. And then over here, I'm also going to say read. And then finally, in order to allow the API to make changes to your A record, I'm going to add one more, and this will also be a zone setting, but this one will be a DNS change. So we're going to allow DNS changes, and this one we're going to say edit, so it can edit the name of your DNS record. And then finally, under resources, it'll say include all zones. Since I don't have any other zones, I don't have anything here. But if you had 3 or 4 domains that you were managing, you could have an API key for one particular zone. A zone is equivalent to a domain. And so I can say continue to summary, and then create token. So it creates a token, and this is the token. You're only given this token one time, so you're going to want to go ahead and copy that. You can go ahead and test to see if that works by copying the phrase they give you here. And if I do a terminal and bring that terminal up and paste that curl command in, it will come back and say this token is valid and active here. So that means that it actually worked. So the way that we use the Cloudflare API is that we have a Docker container that calls the Cloudflare API to change the A record for your domain. In my particular case, we'll say that it is Scotti-BYTE.com. And in order to do that, I have to create this Docker container. If you already have a Docker server running, that's just fine. For my subscribers who follow the channel frequently, they know that I like to nest my LXD containers or my Docker containers inside of a LXD container for easier management and isolation. And so in this particular case, I'm going to do a lexc launch Ubuntu colon 2204. I'm going to call the name of the LexD container Cloudflare. I'm giving it the default profile, which tells it which storage pool to go get its storage from. And I'm giving it the bridge profile so that this container is projected out onto a mainland address. I'm setting boot.autostart equals to true, which means that every time that the server boots, it goes ahead and starts this container. And finally, I have security.nesting equals to true, which is what allows us to nest a Docker container inside of a LexD container. So now I'm going to log into my new container with the lexc shell to Cloudflare. And I'm connected to the root account, and I consider a best practice to be able to create a username. So I'm going to say add user Scott, and I'm going to give Scott a password. And then I'm going to also grant Scott a sudo privilege. So I'm going to do user mod -a capital G sudo Scott. Next, we're going to install Docker with the Docker script from the Docker website, which is a curl command. I'm going to install Docker Compose with a apt install docker-compose-y so it doesn't prompt me. And now one final step for Docker. I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen and do a user mod -a capital G Docker Scott, which will put Scott or give Scott Docker privilege. And then I'm going to do an su space dash space Scott, which will move over to the Scott account. And now we're on the main folder over here. I like to go ahead and say make dir, and in this case, I'm just going to call this thing DNS because that's kind of what it's supposed to be. I'll cd into DNS, and next we'll create a Docker Compose file for the application. So now we do a nano on docker-compose.yml. And then I'm going to go ahead and paste in the Docker application YAML code. In this case, I'm creating a service that is called Cloudflare API. You can name this service anything you want. The image is this OZNU/Cloudflare-DDNS, and it's the latest iteration of that. I say always restart this container, and then it has two environment variables that you'll want to set up. One of them is that API key that we got from Cloudflare. So in this particular case, that's my API key, which by the way, I'll change after this. And then the zone name is Scotti-BYTE.com, and that is the A record that I want to have follow my WAN address. So basically, whenever your WAN address changes, it will go out there and know to update that. So I go ahead and do a Control-O and Enter to save the file, and a Control-X to exit the nano editor. And then I simply do a Docker space compose space up -D, and that goes ahead and starts the container. It pulls all the container components, starts it up, and there you go. So in my case, if I do a Docker PS, it's going to constantly tell me that it's restarting the container. I think, yeah, it did that. See, here it said it was up for 1 second, and then here it's up for 1 second again. Part of the reason for that is because that Cloudflare account does not host Scotti-BYTE.com. So if you have a problem here, it probably means that you don't have an A record on your Cloudflare that matches up with your domain name that you specified in the Docker Compose file. And after you get everything transitioned, you want to make a copy beforehand of all your A records and CNAME records you had back on Google, and then check them against the ones that have been ported over to Cloudflare. In my case, it only ported over about 12 of my 50, and I had to hand enter the rest. I'm not entirely sure why that's the case, but this is how you get this up and running and how it works. You can also see what it's doing by doing a docker compose logs -f, and it will go ahead and follow the log file and tell you what happened. And so it says, hey, make sure your zone variable is correct and your domain exists. Well, on that account, that domain Scotti-BYTE.com doesn't exist, and it actually says zone for Scotti-BYTE.com was not found in your Cloudflare account. So that's how you can kind of debug this thing and make sure it's up and running correctly. So in summary, Cloudflare has a lot of popular features that extend to managing your registered domains. And moving a domain from Google Domains to Cloudflare is fairly straightforward, following a few simple steps that I outlined in this video. And the Cloudflare API allows keeping your ISP dynamic WAN address up to date with your domain A record so that your self-hosted applications continue to work. Anyway, that's it for today. Please don't forget to subscribe and like the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell also, and we'll see you next time.